last panel of the day. Maybe one of our most exciting panels of the day for sure. Let everybody get settled here, but we're going to be talking the power of narrative, the importance of telling stories, and merging sports and entertainment. And our host and moderator being Nathan Elliott. Please give him a big welcome.
And to make a long story short, we're just coming out of having shown Blackmark, which is a number of years in the making, a story that tells really an experience that Matt Barnes had back in high school that we'll talk a little bit about today. But just the power of sports and the ability to bring people like us together is sort of phenomenal. I want to start with a special thank you to Jessica and Theo for putting this inaugural category together. I've seen the emails over the course of the last 3 weeks on just getting something brand new sort of launched and then throwing in a podcast, live podcast, and just a number of people together. So just sort of phenomenal work on that front. I have this line that I use with my team, that life is a story, that's what we are. And as you know, the power of storytelling is going to be front and center here today. And I don't think there's any better vehicle or mechanism to tell those stories than sports. It's a great democratizer. It brings us together. It goes over sort of any lines of wealth that, or poor or poverty that really sort of get in the way of just important sort of storytelling. And I'm new to this game, and it actually started with two people that are sort of on this panel here today. So it's sort of this interesting moment of sort of coming back in time to be able to reflect. But I first got involved in sort of sports storytelling about 3.5 years ago when a friend up in Canada, as you can likely tell from my accent, I'm Canadian, had just said, I have a feeling you need to meet Matt Barnes. I knew a little bit about him. I know that he was a bad boy of the NBA, and as most people, that's pretty much all that we knew. So I jumped on a flight. We met at the Ace Hotel, I guess 3.5 years ago. And he told me this phenomenal story of 1998 when he was a senior at Del Campo High School, where he was at the center of a national hate crime, where the Ku Klux Klan came to the school, tagged it in insidious graffiti, and it forever changed him. And that's where his Blackmark was born. It was this emblem of obviously hope, but it's trauma that he continues to this day. So to fast forward, I guess, a few years from that meeting, obviously we saw the world change and the rights movement and Matt being in front and center, and we just decided to do something about it. So we self-financed a film that was really shown to the world for the first time today. So we're riding that sort of energy. I do hear that, the other set and the other category of films that we're playing at the same time were phenomenal, and we're going to talk a little bit about those today. So because we have 9 panelists, I'm going to be very quick with the introductions. So if you're ever looking for motivation or obviously inspiration, I implore you all to just take a look at the biographies of literally everybody that's sitting up on this panel here today, and you'll be just in for wonderment. Whether it's coming from the agency space to the creator space to the athletes, but the convergent point here is telling stories of sports that come in a multitude of different ways. So I'm going to ask the panelists just to put up your hand when I introduce you. So I'll start with Hélène, who's come in from France, and she's a brilliant director, photographer, and in her sort of short history, she's been able to work with some of the biggest names in sports, whether it's Kevin Garnett, the late, great Kobe Bryant, and the list goes on. And I'm just sort of really mesmerized by the work that she does by blending the power of photography and the imagery to tell important stories, not only in the commercial space, but also in the filmmaking space. Teresa, I'll ask you to put up your hand as well. There's a dynamic duo of Teresa and Sydney, obviously WNBA champions, advocates, social media personalities, and their TV show, which we'll speak to today, is phenomenal. And obviously it's powerful for not only the topics that they focus in on, but just how they've been able to sort of bring the rhythm and energy from the court to off court. So I'm looking forward to speaking to that. We have Kai, is over there in the corner. He is the GOAT. Many people refer to him as that. If there involves water and it involves a board, it's likely that he's a champion in that sort of space. And obviously, Life of Kai has taken the brilliance of just the power of surfing and the water and the swimming lessons that come from that, applying them to the filmmaking space. So super grateful to having you here today. Darren Prince is an agent extraordinaire, obviously has a lens of representation of the athletes and the important decision making that goes into film selection, show selection. So we're really looking forward to hearing your stories here today. Madeline Down is literally the hardest working woman, I think, in this entire room. When I was looking through her biography and then the sheer volume of content that she produced while with the Seahawks and now as sort of a director on her own right, I'm really sort of excited to delve into those stories and just the workflow that it creates to sort of produce the volume that she is. We have another good friend, Eric Newman. When I first got to meet Matt Barnes, he actually invited me the subsequent day to a taping of All the Smoke. It was in its infancy, sort of at the time, in this little hovel in New York City, but I sort of, in seeing the work that he was doing at that time, it was the future of podcast creation and digital creation sort of in real time. So it's only fitting, that Eric is here today, and he's since gone on to producing all sorts of amazing shows with Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce. He had a beautiful release of a film with Kevin Garnett, which we'll speak to. Anything is Possible, which I guess is a theme of today. And he actually has 2 films that are in the festival circuit right now. And we'll be talking to him about how he bridges sort of obviously the large format films with sort of the day-to-day micro-type films as well. Matt Barnes, as I mentioned, I will say that he has to bounce to another engagement in about 30 minutes, so we'll speak to that, but he's at a full day already, so super happy to have him here today. And last but not least, we have Meta World Peace. Obviously, he needs no introduction. You likely know that he is sort of the lead judge sort of this entire category, and he's been a creator for his entire life. As likely you all know, as a member of player in the NBA, he was in the music industry, he's been a reality TV star. He's played in the unscripted space. He's one of the leading sort of, investors, and has transitioned so perfectly, off the court to just really, tell these exciting stories. So looking to, really delve into your decision making around content creation. So with that, Matt, because I know you need to leave, we'll sort of jump into this. I guess when I first met Matt, as mentioned, it was sort of on the rise of the podcast. And my sort of question to you, Matt, is you've opened up way more now, post-career, than on the court. Sort of you were a little bit closed off for reasons which we looked at in the documentary. But sort of since then, you've opened up your life, whether it's, Instagram, where you're documenting literally the entire of your day, from workouts to coaching your son's teams, all the way through to really sort of important, opinionated pieces that often make front page news. And you've sort of, morphed into just sharing widely. I mean, you just finished season 1 of your Barnes Bunch show. What went into that? And if you explain sort of that process and that journey of just opening up and what you've gone through, and, for everyone in this room, what were the good side and also sort of the bad side of opening the world to your life?
Yeah. Opening up is scary, and, similar to Meta, as professional athletes, particularly when we played, we caught the end of social media. So what was said about us on ESPN or printed in the paper was the gospel. And we never really had a chance to defend ourselves or really tell our side of the story. So transitioning in my post-career, the reason why I got into the media space and maybe the storytelling space, because I think there was just such a huge misconception of who I am, and getting a chance to know, obviously being a teammate of Meta and understanding who he was, I know there was a huge misconception for him. So I just thought overall, there was just such a huge misconception of who athletes were in general at that time. And obviously now, through these, you really get a chance to see everyone in all facets of them, but it wasn't that way when we played. So my transition into this space was to really kind of, I guess, break down the stigma and stereotypes of who people thought I was and kind of show who I really am. The father, the entrepreneur, the businessman, someone who's been in his fair share of trouble but doesn't look for trouble. So transitioning from a 15-year NBA career to media and sports television, it was something that interested me. I didn't know I would take this journey, but jumped on the journey and found success early, and was able to turn that success of being on ESPN and Fox to my own podcast, All the Smoke. First year out of the gates. Now you see a ton of people with basketball podcasts, sports podcasts, but we were one of the very first, maybe first 2 or 3, to be honest with you, and found a lot of success in that, and was able to transition that into a whole production company. So I think the reason why I'm in this space now is to tell authentic truths, because again, I mean, you get labeled, and labels are earned, whether good or bad. So whether that label fits you or it doesn't fit you, I think it's only right to be able to really tell your truth. So I've been able to, in my 7 years removed from the NBA, of just tell my story, but also create a platform for my brothers and sisters to tell their journey, whether it be sports, entertainment, music, film, television, whatever it may be, just to really show that other side. And I think where we've had success with my show in general is allowing, kind of breaking down the walls to, we were fortunate enough to do Kobe Bryant's last interview and kind of showing the other side of him, and Steph Curry, and we did one of Will Smith's first interview post slap. And so we've kind of jumped all around in this space, but to create, and Eric Newman was along the journey when our first producer with the show, but we wanted to create an environment where people felt comfortable sharing, because as you guys know, athletes and media, we didn't really get along too much early in, back in the days, but now it's a little different. But, just to be able to create a safe environment where people feel comfortable enough to share their real in-depth truths. So, we've been fortunate to be able to kind of open that door for ourselves, but then also encourage and motivate and inspire this next generation of athletes to do the same. So I love where sports media is at currently. I feel like there's a huge shift in it. There will always be the big machines, the ESPNs and Foxes, but you don't necessarily need to have them behind you anymore to be heard and to be understood. And I'm very proud to be a small part of kind of that change in the narrative.
And that's actually, my second question was about sort of athlete-owned IP, right? You've had the opportunity to work with the ESPNs and the Showtimes, and particularly the last couple of years, you've shifted into this athlete-owned, all the smoke production, where you've been talking about this for quite some time, but you're doing it now. So talk about that and sort of the value. Obviously, there's a lot of challenges where you lose those capacities of ESPNs and these mainstay, companies that have decades in the business. And now we saw it front and center in the session today. Small team.
I think there's a big shift, and I was someone who was fortunate enough to, first of all, have the opportunity to work in those spaces, which I was very thankful for, and kind of learn the ropes, but then also realize, like, they're paying me good, but they're making more money off what I'm saying than I'm making. So how does that work? You know what I mean? So I, respectfully thank them for the opportunity, but pulled myself from ESPN, pulled myself from Fox, pulled myself from the LA Clippers, pulled myself from the Sacramento Kings to build my own company now. So now when I talk, I'm talking on behalf of my company, and then those paychecks kind of reflect that. There's no middleman anymore. Like, it's okay, well, everything I'm giving you now, I'm able to monetize because it is my company. And again, I think that's where it's going. Although I started talking post-career, I love the Draymond Greens and the Paul Georges and all the guys that are currently playing now, because I think all you guys really want to know, as great as the Stephen A. Smiths and the Skip Baylesses are, you guys kind of want to know exactly how we're feeling in that moment. And I think current players have really kind of taken this by the reins now to say, hey, we don't need to go to these big outlets to kind of tell you how we feel. Come, if you want to know, and I think Draymond was amazing during the finals with Boston Celtics, you want to know how I feel about what just happened? Come to my platform and I'll tell you. And I think that kind of in a way was a huge shift in how media is, how the stories are told and how you guys consume it. So I think IP has always been everything, and we're a little late to the table now, but we're definitely taking our IP back and understanding the importance of that, and allowing our brothers and sisters to share in on that instead of having it taken away by the bigger companies.
It's really hard. We've been talking for 4 years about just sort of what went into it. And obviously when Showtime went the way of the dodo, they really needed to step up and pull the socks up, and then they're doing an amazing job of it. I just had a slight lens into sort of the coming together of a live show because I was on the emails this week. And I know that personalities and athlete representation is a very difficult thing, particularly with our guest today, who is amazing, but Marshawn Lynch's access is not easy to say the least. So that brings me to Hélène, that I want to just speak to. Obviously, you've had the opportunity to work with the likes of Mbappe, Kevin Durant, the late great Kobe Bryant, and the idea of capturing an athlete's authentic self is really interesting to me, because athletes tend to be very guarded. You know what I mean? They're in the media, they're in the spotlight all the time. So please tell me about your process and of extracting sort of the true meaning of these athletes and what they represent.
I'd say to stay calm, to stay very calm, to be able to observe, to be able to understand what's happening for them. Very first project was Nike called me to telling me Kevin Durant is going to Europe and on tour in Europe. We need you to document his journey in Europe. He will meet people, he will train. Would you be done to do it? I said, of course. When should I leave? They say tomorrow morning. I said, okay. And then straight to the point, like I cannot even, say hello or anything like that. We don't introduce to each other. So it can be a bit brutal also, to have someone straight, like putting a camera on you. So I think I was a bit aware of that, and I was trying to stay as calm as possible all the time to be able to understand what's happening, to be able to understand what they're going through. Stay at a good distance, and yet trying to capture anything I think would be amazing for them to have as a testimony of their journey. And for example, Kevin Durant, at the beginning, it was in 2015, so he was maybe not very used to it yet, used to camera, maybe doesn't really like it. And so, yeah, I think at the beginning I was very calm, and then as the day passes, I think he trusted me more and more, and I think that's how you build a relationship with athletes, and they allow you in their space and intimacy.
Thank you, and I think that's perfect connection to Darren. You've spent sort of many years on the athlete representation space, having sort of represented some of the biggest athletes that have sort of ever graced the hard court or the fields before, the likes of Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Dennis Rodman, the list goes on. Can you talk about sort of how you handle the athletes, and in particular, the decision-making that goes into choosing the right projects for them at the time, and even sort of detail the Smoking Joe Frazier work that's upcoming right now as an example of that?
Oh, Smoking Joe, we always wanted to do a legacy piece when he was alive, and he was a little bit, I'd say, he wasn't happy with several of the ones that were put out. He liked One Nation Divisible, if anybody saw that on HBO, which I loved. When We Were King, some of the Ali docs he wasn't portrayed properly, but as you know, and some people, if you know me, one of the biggest blessings of my life in business was I got Ali and Frazier to make peace the night before the 2002 NBA All-Star Game. I've got the photos and the videos to prove it, and we sat center court at the All-Star Game the next day. So production company from Canada came to us last year, and Joe's doc is going to be coming out next year telling the story, because I know every sports icon around the world, fans, both Ali and Frazier, want to know if Joe left this earth bitter, and he certainly didn't, nor did Ali. I think, it really depends on the personality. Dennis Rodman was always a lot easier. He got it, whether it was Beyond the Glory, Sports Century, when Esty Portney called me MJ's biz manager. He knew about that content, obviously. He knew about all the footage in 95, 96, 97, right around the time I started working with him. And what's funny is Dennis is never on time. I think Matt, Meta, you guys have heard so many stories, but that, for The Last Dance, he was actually early. And he crushed it for about 3 hours. And when he left, he called me up and he's like, bro, this is going to be big. And it changed the landscape of docuseries and sports.
It literally did.
Forever.
Like, I mean, the Last Dance changed. There's this seminal watershed moment sort of in the history of content creation in the sports landscape, and is a good part of why we're here today. And many argue that he was the star of the show on that front. So Dennis Rodman obviously, makes sense, but take someone like, Magic Johnson. People are wanting to get access to him all the time. How do you go about choosing the right piece, and what do you look out for when doing so?
Well, he's got such an incredible team around him, Irvin. I've been with him for 30 years, and he's never oversaturated himself. He's always been very careful. To the reason he's got a multi-billion-dollar brand right now, he always aligns himself with, the perfect partners. And I think the Apple TV project that came out last year was tremendous. And, I think a lot of athletes, Tom Brady, Joe Montana, who I've worked with for about 25 years, The Last Dance made a lot of athletes and icons want to come out and tell their legacy story. As telling Matt earlier, Jerry West was near to me for about 8 years before he passed on June 12th, and just never wanted to do it. It wasn't Jerry's personality. I was with Larry Bird a couple years ago in Indiana, and I was like, LB, there's multiple opportunities. He goes, not interested. So getting back to the personalities, I think it depends on the talent and what their vision is, and if they want it now or when they're gone.
Yeah, I think it's really what one of the resounding themes that we see is just the authentic stories of the athletes and for them being vulnerable. Kai, I had an opportunity over the last couple of weeks to just do research on obviously your illustrious career. I think the youngest Hall of Fame member in the surfing community, which is super exciting. And your team, who is amazing, by the way, sort of suggested that one of your big focuses right now is on vulnerability and sort of taking the vulnerability of the work that you do in the water and bringing that to content creation. So similar to the question to Matt, that needed to sort of open himself out to the world, how have you found that process of being vulnerable and sharing everything?
So, vulnerability, I think you can compartmentalize what you do as an athlete because you have this end goal and you're just trying to get to that point. And once you achieve that, it's going to the next level. And I think one of the biggest teachers I've ever had has been Mother Nature, the ocean, especially when you're trying to challenge yourself in waves that you can never beat, but you can sort of ride alongside. That being really big waves, places like Nazaré in Portugal or places like Jaws in Hawaii that get up to 80 feet and potentially 100 feet tall. And you end up looking at these walls of water as a mirror, and you see your truest self in that moment. And that's been a really good way to reflect and improve on yourself. And sometimes you look at that and you're not proud of who you are in that moment. And other times you see a person that you couldn't believe is yourself. And so trying to tell that story to other people, sharing that through the medium of film and, different storytelling. Normally my fans on the beach are trees and, the palm trees swing in the wind. So trying to articulate it has always been the biggest challenge. But, Jody and Nico, who are right here, they've done a really good job of helping me try to tell that story and translate it. I've always been into filmmaking myself because it's like, how could you give that feeling of riding these really big waves to everyone else? And I think if you could bottle that up, you could probably solve world peace, but the only way to get it is to earn it, and that's to, go in the water and enjoy yourself.
Yeah, thank you. And obviously just how vulnerable you are in the water. And sort of to build on that, two other themes that I've sort of read about in your life are innovation and progression. That's what really has sort of pushed you, throughout your sort of career. So can you sort of talk about how you've employed those principles to really, the dynamic show of Life of Kai that's sort of ever evolving and sort of changing, from episode to episode. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. I look at, what I do, there's like the performance athleticism side. There's also the technology side that can allow you to do this. We wouldn't be riding waves of this magnitude if we didn't have the equipment to do it. And that's these Sea-Doos that are extremely powerful to come get you and save you in places that you would perish if you stayed longer than a few waves. It's looking at other sports outside of surfing that almost seem polar opposite, like Formula One or America's Cup sailing, that their budgets are in the hundreds of millions of dollars, which surfing is quite exactly the opposite. But you can take little things, whether it's the aerodynamics of the car of a Formula One vehicle, and apply that to your board. It could be through hydrofoils in the big world of America's Cup sailing, and utilizing aerospace technology like carbon fibers and different sort of materials that will allow you to do something that you didn't think was possible. And so it's this real seesaw where, you know, your athleticism goes up on one side, and then you need the technology to come up, and then you try to chase the technology back, and you're slowly climbing that ladder. And if you get a good rhythm with it, you can go very quick to the top. And that's what has allowed me to, you know, continually sort of surprise myself with what comes next. You know, there's always a new door opening, and the sport of surfing, big wave riding, you know, it's limitless in its possibilities, and you can never master it. It's less of a sport, I think, and more of like a lifetime pursuit. And that's what makes it really exciting every day, because there's this great purpose to be better. And you can get that satisfaction if you just look in the right places.
Just the passion. Yeah, the passion that you sort of bring to this room and sort of speak to is something that I've sort of seen across sort of all the athletes sort of on this panel here. So that brings me to Sydney and Teresa. For those in the audience who don't know, they're obviously champions, multiple-time champions, and the whole narrative around the successes that they've had on the court for many, many years. But they're also the stars of a new unscripted show, the Sid and TP show, of which basically it documents sort of their story from bench warmers to the idea of becoming the faces of the NBA. In reviewing sort of the show and watching it, sort of one of the prevailing themes that comes out and how they've been sort of innovators or front runners by focusing on sort of the central themes of Black as well as LGBTQ voices. So I want you to talk a little bit about that, as it's really sort of prevalent in the show, and that meaning and the challenges and opportunities of being literally sort of two of the best in this space in the sports landscape that needs more voices just like yours.
Yeah, so our director, Carly, is in the crowd, and when they pitched the log line to us, like on our initial call, before we knew it was even going to be a TV show, Carly got on the call and was like, hey, I put together all the thoughts that y'all had about like what could be funny, the like hijinks, the pranks, all these things that y'all want to do, and I think it could be funny if we make the long line be, y'all are two WNBA bench warmers who are striving to become the face of the WNBA despite the fact that nobody asked you to. So we go on this journey to be like super popular and known in the WNBA. And the funny thing is that it ends up working out. Like TP said when the show was done, like I've been called the face of the league more now than I was in my entire decade-long career, because I think so many people connected with us through comedy. And we knew that when we started the show, we didn't want to have a lot of basketball in there. Like, it's what we've done for 25 plus years of our life and 10 plus years pro. But we knew that if we connected to people through comedy and not through the WNBA, because we see how limited it could be to get fans to want to watch the W. But we said people love laughing. And if we can get them to relate to us and relate to the things that we do in our show, then surely they might become WNBA fans just because they like us. And the amount of people that will like comment on our stuff now and be like, we watch the Las Vegas Aces now because of y'all, we like the WNBA, all of this. Like, I think for us it was really important to like go about it in that way. And then you touch on just speaking on like black issues, LGBTQ plus issues, like our staff, our crew, three of them are back there, Rachel, Kwani, and Carly, and our crew was pretty much all female. We had 2 guys on 2 days, and those were the worst days, honestly. But we let them stick around, and you know, we had a lot of minorities in our crew. The WNBA is like 75% black, and so the stories that we told on our show were just very reflective of the league that we represent, and that was super important to us.
Do you want to expand on that a little bit? Like I understand that the entirety of the team is sort of made up of obviously just a diverse sort of, you know, setting, and that regimented, concerted decision making went into that, and I think that's a model for emulation.
Actually use ourselves in a creative space. Sid and I have been in the W for over a decade, and by a show of hands, how many people have heard of Sydney Colson or Teresa Plaisance? Okay, wow. That was honestly a generous amount. Well, that kind of, you know, derails what I was trying to say, but we typically don't get that many hands. But Sid and I have been in the league for 10 years, and there was a reason that we were on the team. We were never the superstars. So there's a line in the show that I say, it's really hard to keep a job for 10 years without any statistics to back it, right? It's not like we're like killing the boards, we're like rebounding the heck out the ball. We're like, yeah, we need them in the game for this. Like, we've kind of been the glue, and we've been like the human beings behind, our basketball ability and keeping the team together and stuff like that. And I think that, right now specifically, we're in a time where the Olympics are being held. And I think that, you'll turn on the TV one day and you'll be like, wait, this is a sport, and an Olympic sport at that, right? And then you find yourself invested in it because you understand these individual stories behind the human being, behind the participant of this sport. And I think that now we're getting into a time in society where we want to separate the athlete from the human being, and a lot more people want to understand who the human being is. And I think that's what our show probably does best, is that we bring out the human being element to being an athlete and all the trials and tribulations that come with, trying to be the face of the league, which was a very difficult task. If anyone ever has the opportunity to become a face of the league, it is hard. But it was a lot of fun along the way.
So it's funny that the transition into becoming the face of the league took a show like this, but also the rise, Sydney in particular, of your social media. Clearly you take a concerted effort day to day and sort of engaging that, and you mention it, in your initial lines, that it's all about comedy, but it's also being about vulnerable. So speak a bit to just the social media side of the business that leads to the success of your show, and how you've been able to build an exciting brand for yourself through the various platforms, from Twitter through to TikTok, if you will.
Yeah, I think like Matt spoke about, probably Meta, like what's your name again? Kai, Life of Kai. I'm gonna watch. Okay, so like the athletes up here are well aware of, like, fans want to know about who you are, like what you're interested in, and so it benefits us to put ourselves out there a lot of times. Sometimes it can backfire, it can be detrimental, but I found that I like to speak on a lot of things through comedy, and so I'll take a stance or maybe not take a stance, but it'll be in a comical way on my page, and it's like a way to have a conversation be started. Like, I think that's where we're lacking in society, is that even if we have different opinions, we can still like have a conversation about it. So I like for things to at least spark some kind of debate, spark a conversation. Maybe we don't agree, but we can hear one another's side, and then maybe we walk away and we still don't agree, but maybe down the line you'll look back like, you know what, I had this respectful conversation, respectful debate with somebody. It didn't like get to name calling anything crazy. We just had two differing opinions, and I didn't see what they meant back then, but now, like a year later, like I see where they were coming from. Like, now I'm encountering this thing, and because of the way we went about that situation, I'm able to maybe change my viewpoint or respect where they're coming from a little more. So that's like my desire, is just to be funny. And hopefully some people will gravitate toward it, some people won't, but I just do it because I laugh at the stuff I say, honestly.
And that's clear. It's clear. And that brings me to, Maddie. And obviously, as I mentioned in the introduction, the volume of the work that you've done has been incredible with the Seahawks. And obviously, as you've morphed into your own sort of, IP, if you will. Sports, and in particular live sports, is one of the most challenging sort of segments of sports telling that you have. You have game day, you have logistics, you have the personalities that we need to manage. So can you tell a little bit about obviously managing all of that, and then putting out dozens upon dozens of show, whether it's the Sound of the Seahawks, Legion of Boom, the social media that all goes into that? How do you manage that workflow?
Let me try now. Okay. It's not by knowing microphones, obviously. I would say, to answer your volume question first, I mean, I don't do it by myself. Like all of us up here, we all have teams and groups that we're doing it with. So I think for the most part, it's kudos to the team I get to work with. I think in sports, that is not unusual. So if you're on the team side, you are inherently making a lot of content. And I see team loosely. I mean, I know that there's single athletes that have teams and all of that, but I think the biggest challenge is we don't get to control the story. So for Season of Boom, for example, it was a story about the Super Bowl that the Seahawks won 11 years ago now, and we were so excited about it because we actually got to tell a story from front to back for the first time, where 98% of your job when you're on the team side or following something like that, you're not predicting it. You have no idea what's going to happen, and then you're just reacting. So it was nice to kind of be in that proactive storytelling mode. But I would say from a volume sense, there's just a lot of pomp and circumstance around sports. That's what makes it fun. A lot of my job was on the production side of just all the video you'd see coming out of the Seahawks, but also the live side. And sports is, some of the last live shows left. I would give SNL, credit as well for that. But, a lot of my job also was just in the control room on game days at home games and all the cameras we have there and what's going to happen and what happens at TV timeouts and when is the mascot going out and when are the dancers going out and all of that jazz. So we always kind of try to pretend like we're Oz, and we hope no one notices us. My grandpa would always try to watch the games to look for me. And I said, Grandpa, if you're seeing me, something's gone really wrong. So I think that kind of defines like sports production in a nutshell is, we aren't used to kind of the credit side of it. So I'm getting used to even like adding credits to the end of the videos that we are making. And so with that, I would just come back to it's all about the team that you do it with. And luckily I've done it with some really amazing people.
Thank you, and it's super impressive. So that brings me to Meta. When you think about a creator, I don't think that I can think of anyone else in the entirety of sports for a long time where creation was in his or her DNA, and that's Meta. So whether it's the unscripted space, the scripted space, his book, the move into reality television, sort of the list goes on. And as you know, he's sort of the lead judge here. Brings me to the question, Meta, like, what's exciting you about the sports content landscape to get involved, like something like Holly Shorts here today?
Thanks for having me. I think I've just been creative since day one. I guess it dates back to when I was failing in high school, my ninth grade, freshman in high school, and just pushing it, going from a D average to a 95 average senior year to receiving a letter from Princeton, and then also to trying to major in architecture. I know my goal in life was to make $35,000 a year. I wanted to be a math teacher, but I worked so hard, I became really good at basketball. So when I was in college at St. John's, actually, I went to St. John's because it's from New York City. It's in New York City. I'm from New York, from the biggest federal housing project in America. So before that, I was going to go to Notre Dame, or I was going to go to Miami for architecture. But so then, you go to St. John's and you get into the NBA, and just playing basketball is not enough. When you're building, different projects. I forget all the terminologies. It's a long time ago, but your mind is all over the place. You're trying to build infrastructure, so just playing basketball is not enough. So I often became bored with basketball, even though I was in the gym doing what I got to do, in the gym late nights after the club, sweat out the alcohol, all that stuff every night. But so I did what I had to do there. But it's always like I got so much time. Time is a killer. It can get you in trouble. You can use it to work for you. So I did work at Circuit City my first year. People was like, wow, Meta World Peace is working at, Ron Artest at the time, working at Circuit City. What happened? I'm like, they said, did he go broke? I said, no, my check was $900,000 and I wanted a discount. It's not like I'm making $10 million a year. I'm making $999,000 after taxes, $500, and I can't afford all these DVDs. So I applied for a job at Circuit City. So it was just like, that type of stuff is just like natural to me. It didn't seem out of box, even though I'm a little bit out of box. Then I did an album. I did a couple albums, but the albums was more for. It wasn't really to impress anybody or to prove anything, because it was contradictory to what I was trying to do in my career. It was killing a lot of deals, because where I'm from, in my background, I'm telling this whole story out there, but it was more just to get some off. So I did my last season, I did 4 albums, actually, in 2017, 3 albums that year, but I took it all off iTunes. I remember interviewing Kobe Bryant in 2008, so before everybody was doing this stuff in sports media. 2008, I interviewed Kobe Bryant, tried to sell it to Fox, but they didn't quite understand what I was trying to do. But you see today, everybody's interviewing athletes. That interview's still on YouTube. And then in 2012, I actually launched the podcast, and that actually inspired Drink Champs. Noriega, I tell you. So I actually had a podcast, but I didn't really understand the marketing side. You know, the marketing, how do you launch a product and then market it? I had signature shoes. I did a bunch of stuff throughout my career. So then when I retired, I went back to school because I wanted to learn how to take product to market, you know, where athletes affect the outcome of success and really telling stories in silence. You know, even though my persona was big, I removed my Instagram multiple times. I wanted to challenge myself to see if I could reach an audience without using traditional, modern day media, and just go and stick to traditional media. And it kind of bit me in the ass a little bit, but it was a social experiment, you know. So how can I storytell with silence, and really in the back end office, and people when they meet you now they're asking you, hey Meta, would you show up on my show? I'm like, no, I really want to understand the accounting and the administration, and I really want to understand what narrative are you trying to tell. And I really want to understand the technology that you're using and what's the future plan. So you could also tell, now I'm storytelling like that because there's not enough of us that understands the back end of how, you know, the consumers are receiving the content. You know, so it was a little bit, people said I was a headache and hard to work with, but because I asked a lot of questions and I could read my own contracts and stuff like that. But, you know, and I inspired a lot of people actually. A lot of the athletes, you know, they'll tell you to today, you know, just being on the phone on the back end and telling them how to negotiate your deal. You know, so I work with a lot of athletes on the back end and stuff like that. So storytelling with silence is what I like these days.
It's clear that you've treated it as a business. And obviously, when did you start thinking about your transition game? You know, your transition to from the hard court to the things that we're talking about here today. And did you actively think about retirement and there was going to be a day that happens far too soon for all athletes that this was what you're going to rely on, and take that into even the venture capital work, the work that you're doing as an investor, and how that connects to content creation, because it needs to get funded somehow.
That's true. So yeah, it's true. Consumer products, content is a great marriage. But I think I was never into business. I was only into having fun, being kind of unpredictable, and philanthropy. You know, I'm on the board of UCLA Psychiatric Award. I got the J. Walter Citizenship Award. I'm going after a couple other big awards. The reason I got into business was because I wasn't getting the support because of my persona. You know, I was very unapologetic about being very proud about where I'm from. So a lot of people didn't really understand how to take it. So I would never have the opportunities that a lot of others had, right? So, you know, that's why I decided to go back to school and really dig deep. You know, so when I retired, I went back to UCLA for digital marketing, coding. I went to Concordia Irvine on Saturdays for business analytics, digital analytics. So I learned how to work all the platforms from GitHub, AWS, RFQs, Alibaba, every single one of the platforms, because I wanted to understand, you know, how to push my own projects forward, how to push my narratives forward. So over the last 8 years, I was pretty much in the war room. And then after all that time and spending with all these different types of entrepreneurs, and my jargon got better. I had one story. I went to Sand Hill Road and just knock on doors just to learn. And some people turned me down, some people didn't. You know, that's pretty much how I would learn, just traveling by myself. And then now I'm able to help athletes, you know, and also help myself and understand the opportunity. It's so many opportunities. And how do you manage it all without having someone you have to pay to manage it? You know, I wanted to be the person, now I can pay myself to manage, you know, my own stuff.
Good stuff. And yeah, congratulations. One of the best transition games we've seen in the NBA. I think it's fitting that the two of you are sitting beside each other, because I think, Eric, you likely produced the All the Smoke episode that Meta was on several years ago. Eric is really interesting. He's a director, producer extraordinaire who's on the rise. And he sort of bridges this gap between the micro, what we call the podcast digital landscape that has those 24-hour turnarounds. But he's also directing, producing, writing features. The example of Anything is Possible with KG. Can you speak to how you bridge those gaps and how they improve you as a director by having those quick turnaround times sort of on that digital side, but also, as you have several films in the film circuit right now, you know, how that makes you a better filmmaker in that regard?
Sure. Real quick, following him is an honor. I just have to shout out, like, your film, Quiet Storm, which obviously, we screened that together in New York, but it forced me to raise the bar because of what it said and your courage to get up in front of the camera and talk about all the things that you had dealt with throughout your life. So I've never thanked you properly, and I greatly appreciate it. So thank you for that. It's really interesting, the different parts of my creative mind I need to use when you're laying out a podcast and then looking at laying out a feature film. So much of the success of All the Smoke, both at the beginning and in the present, was, can we have athletes on the show who are going to be comfortable peeling back the layers? And it's not just the stories of the shot that wins the finals or the free agency decision. It's really the stories behind the scenes that tell the DNA of who they are. And because of the social media platforms, we always had to be strategic about, okay, only X amount of people are going to sit down and watch this full episode. We've got to figure out the strategy around what things are going to build the brand of the show, build the audience of the show, and build the engagement of the show on social, as opposed to filmmaking. To be honest, I'm never thinking about that. I'm thinking about the story, the subject, our team, the crew, and then how am I going to raise the bar with our team as a filmmaker to tell really high-level stories. And I'm proud to say, some of those projects I've been able to work on with Kevin Garnett, Anything is Possible is one of them.
So I get to see you work week to week, day to day, sort of across that whole swath of the micro and the macro. And your email is Coach Newman. So what I didn't detail sort of in the bio at the beginning is that Eric's working life started as a teacher in New York City. So as you speak to all of those things on sort of rallying the troops and bringing together all those variables, how did your teaching experience sort of morph into sort of this creative experience? And I'm sure you lean in on that more than most people think.
Yeah, being a teacher and a basketball coach was embedded in me from my family, from the great coaches and mentors that I had when I was young. And, as a teenager and a young adult, I just projected jock. And behind the scenes, I was a total film buff, film nerd, always studying. And when I made the decision, after an incredible ride through New York City, and, before he and I met several years ago, I was doing Nike clinics and I was coaching high school kids and doing incredible things with the game that took me not just all over the country, but all over the world. And when I made the change about a dozen years ago, I knew that running 120 kid, 20 staff, day staff Nike basketball programs was producing. And I was able to take those things and take forming those interpersonal relationships to the set, to forming a team, to building relationships with people in this space. And then there's the competitive side of me, which will never change. And I always had it as a coach. I always had it in terms of being a teacher of the game to instill it in the youth I was working with. And now I don't look at other filmmakers or producers as competition. It's the competition within myself and how far can I push myself and in turn, whatever it is I'm working on.
It's great. So like applying those lessons, obviously we need to give more focus to the teachers, right? Teacher, that's they don't get enough credit, and obviously applying that. And I know we talk about that experience quite a bit. I know your competitive spirit, so that brings me, Teresa. Obviously, between you and Sid, you have 20 plus years of WNBA experience, and then when you take your collegiate and the years before that, tack on another 10. How do you apply the lessons, Teresa, that you sort of learn on the court to content creation and production? And I mentioned that when you watch sort of the synergy and the flow that you have in your show, it seems like you've been here before or been there before. So how did that translate? Was it just that you're really good actors, or is it that you've taken some life lessons from there and applied them into your new found career?
Well, humbly, outside of second grade, I was chosen to be Mary in the nativity scene. Obviously a very prestigious role. Outside of that, I've had no acting experience. And kind of like basketball, like we train over and over again to do the same task. You want to perfect your shot. You want to, make the perfect pass. You want to make the perfect decision. And what you realize is that within these things that you're trying to be perfect in, what is like most fun and what feels the best in real time is when like the perfect becomes subconscious and it just happens. And I think that as somebody who has been on TV before but not directly spoken to or had a speaking role, having a camera in your face and be like, all right, be funny. It's a lot of pressure. And especially for someone who's like never done acting, tried to pursue acting before. So it was a lot of learning along the way. And we had such a great crew that kind of like encouraged us to be like more ourselves. And through that, we learned placement and what presents well and kind of how to grow. At first, we were taking a lot of cues, like, oh, is this what we do? Are we okay like this? And as we went on, we kind of were gauging ourselves and be like, okay, so this is what's going to look best here. And then we've just decided that as a couple, not just very platonic, to add to that, as a platonic couple, we moved through that film space very well. And I think that from the first take that we had, we were in a garage, to the last scene that we did, we were doing a kids camp and doing like a ring ceremony. The growth that we had, not only as like actors, but as individuals, was immense. And there was no life experience that I've ever gone through that was comparative to what I learned in those days filming with the crew and with Sid. And you just learn a lot about who you are as an individual, as well as just being able to play and have fun, because I think that's, at the end of the day, that's what people want, is to play and to find like their inner Peter Pan. And we did that very well. It was a lot of fun, but I think that's what we got out the show.
It's clear you had fun, and it's also sort of a celebration, as I mentioned, of diversity, as we spoke to, and womanhood as an example, which is a tribute to the team. So that brings me to a question to you, Helen. Obviously, you have an upcoming film that's debuting on the 15th of this upcoming week. The show Anaïs is going to be a major celebration of womanhood, of nature, of flow, all on this idea of an amazing marathon runner who goes by that name. So talk to me a little bit about the power of running, similar to Kai's sort of experience and water and the fluidity of that, and sort of the life lessons and inspiration and the awe and the wonder that you can draw from the water. I think the same can be sort of said for running. So tell a little bit about your film and its inspiration for those who won't get a chance to see that this week, and really why you're here today.
I'll tell you a bit more about Anaïs and running, but I think it's also the case in sports in general. But Anaïs, so she's a 33 years old woman, French marathon champion. And when she was 24, she went through a breast cancer, stage 3. She was supposed to die, basically. And so the story is like how through sports also she managed to handle this very hard period of life. And I think about Anaïs and sports in general, there is, I think, Kai, you said it also very well in your documentary. You said about always pushing the limits. I think it's something we really recognized in Anaïs, because she's not only an athlete, she's also a nurse at the hospital during the nights. So basically, she's going to the hospital running. She works at night, and then she goes back home running, and then she sleeps a bit, and then she runs again. She trains to compete, so I'd say through her we have the experience of what sports and athletes brings in terms of human condition, like questioning resiliency, questioning consistency, hard work, teamwork, pushing the limits, and transform pain into something more powerful. And so I think that's what we wanted to celebrate by directing Anaïs, and also women. Often we have this imagery of women and bodies, like perfect bodies, and and that's not us. I'd say it way more beautiful to celebrate women in everything we have and everything we are, and our scars and challenges of life too. And so I think, that's what we wanted to do by bringing Anais on the screen.
And we thank you for it. So I really encourage anyone who can see it. I know it's been advertised heavily through the festival here, so congratulations, and thank you coming all this way to show it to the world. Maddie, I have a question for you. We've talked a lot about creation and everything that goes in, but we're in a reality today where brands are needed more than ever before, and most of you in this room have sort of heard of this verbiage and language around brand entertainment. So at once we want to tell these exciting stories, but amazing brands, Kai, Red Bull as an example, are wanting to tell stories as well within those larger sort of narratives. So Maddie, obviously in your time with the Seahawks, can you talk a little bit about the merging of brand and entertainment and how you manage both to sort of execute on both sides?
Yeah, I think like making something on a person, you just have to understand the brand, right? And what the brand wants to come across as. I would give the example all the time of like the way the Seahawks come across is much different than the Cowboys, than the Eagles, and that's intentional. I mean, all of those brands are specific for that reason. And I think as long as you can push up right to the line of still telling an authentic story, I think that's often the biggest challenge when you work kind of in commercial or brand work, is at times trying to tread that line of, is this a commercial? Is this like propaganda for the brand that I'm just like saying how great everything is all the time? So I think as someone creating content within it, the challenge then is, how do you not kind of like cheat that authenticity while still trying to make that brand feel like its own thing and its own living, breathing creation in itself? Still trying to figure that out all the time.
And that's what we're all trying to do. And Kai, I think that brings me to you. Obviously, I've had the chance to communicate with the Red Bull team sort of in preparation for, today. And Red Bull has built almost the entirety of its brand on the power of storytelling in extreme sports, but, across the globe. So can you talk a little bit about that partnership? Because it really sort of seems like that, and just sort of your relationship and having worked with them for several years now.
Well, yeah, it's really cool. Like Red Bull is a brand that, it's a drink company, but it's almost a marketing machine as well. And, it gives us as athletes, me, an opportunity to, have a voice, but also do things that, never thought you could do without that level of support. And especially in the action sports space where you're not, on a big team, you're kind of on your own individual path. You can go to Red Bull and be like, hey, I have this really good idea, and I think everyone might like it. And, if you are convincing enough, they'll give you an opportunity to fulfill these amazing acts. And it could be, I want to go surf a wave that no one's ever surfed, the biggest wave ever ridden, or I want to go surf that really big wave at night. It's like, how can we make something out of that? And, throughout my career, I've been sponsored by them since I was 12, which I don't think is legal anymore, but I've been with them long enough, and it's really rad because the relationship with them has just continued to evolve, and, they've been with me on all these different stepping stones, and, we've made films together. We have that series, Life of Kai, and, it's continuing to evolve. It's trying to, for me, do something that's never been done before. And then for them, they're bringing me and connecting me to people who, are able to tell that story and make it feel like the audience member is there in person. And for me, it's hard to do both, like, especially when you don't have an entire huge team behind you. Of course, there's people that help you and stuff. You have to be the athlete first, and then you got to think of the social media content after, and then the film after that. Because if you're too confused, you're going to trip over your feet and fall on too big of a wave to come back from. So I'm like, okay, I know what I want. We've spelt out the project, and just make sure you don't miss anything, because this might be a once in a lifetime thing I'm trying to do right now.
Well, whether it was legal or not, they bet the right jockey sort of in this case. And obviously, when you have world records and you become the GOAT and a Hall of Famer, obviously that's great for the brand. And just seeing the work that they're doing, I saw some clip, last month of a ski jumper who went and broke the world record, and literally the most insane sort of clip that I saw this year. And that brings me to Darren for sort of my last questions for the crew is, obviously you've been able to sort of straddle that line of obviously the content creation on the feature side, but also brands. How have you looked at brand entertainment and choosing the right, brands to align with for the athletes that you represent?
I think, again, it more or less goes back to personalities. I think some of our, a lot of our clients, I would say, are so culturally iconic. There's a lot of big anniversaries as well that pop up. Hulk Hogan is one. I know you've worked with him recently. And I think we get so much organic content pushed out around pivotal anniversaries of championships, whether it's in boxing, wrestling, football, basketball, that it's the perfect time for me and my team to then go to the right brands that make the most sense, knowing that a big date is coming up. For example, October 1st, Red Bull, you should be listening, October 1st of 2025 is the 50th anniversary of the Thrilla in Manila, the greatest sporting event ever with Ali Frazier, right? So.
That's great. So I'm being told that we're out of time here. So I think, the major theme that we've seen here, whether we're talking about the marketing side and or just authenticity, vulnerability, is just the power of a great story. And everyone on this panel has been involved in doing so, whether it's on the court, off the court, and how we just sort of see how these various transition games are happening. So with that, I obviously want to thank everybody on this panel. It's so diverse. It's been so great to get to meet you. Okay, perfect. And because we're out of time, I encourage everyone to come up to them and ask questions after. We're not going to have room for a Q&A, but we are going to get one photo of the group, and then they'll come down, and feel free to ask any questions.